Great. So welcome to our Montana Energy Update. What's going on with the Colstrip Power Plant, Public Service Commission, NorthWestern Energy, and more. We'll bring you up to speed on what's been going on with the Montana Public Service Commission, some of its rulemaking, NorthWestern Energy's request to increase electricity rates. And we're going to be hearing from Ian Lund, MEIC's Clean Energy Director, followed by Ann Hedges, who is our Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs. Please feel free to drop your questions into the chat during the event, but we'll also have some time at the end of the event for more deep dive questions. So if you have a need for clarification, you can drop it in the chat, but otherwise we'll have some time at the end where you'll be able to come off mute and ask some more direct questions. And without further ado, I'll hand it off to Ian to get us started.
Thanks, Katie. All right, let's jump into it. So we'll just start off with the basics. Who is the Public Service Commission? They're dealing with a lot of stuff this fall. So they're interesting to us because they regulate monopoly utilities. Monopoly utility customers are captive. They cannot choose where they get their power from, and they cannot choose the price at which they get it. So the PSC is really important because it sets the rates for electricity and methane gas customers, and that's more than 400,000 Montanans. NorthWestern Energy is our biggest investor-owned utility here in the state. And the PSC can determine what can and cannot be included in NorthWestern's electricity rates. So yeah, we keep a close eye on them. So they're doing a bunch of things. We're going to start with a rulemaking that we've been following for the last couple months. And the rulemaking concerns the Integrated Resource Plan, which is formerly known as a resource procurement plan. And this is something that NorthWestern Energy has to file with the PSC every 3 years. And they take a look at their sort of 20-year outlook in terms of the supply and demand of energy in the state. How much energy are we going to use in 20 years? Do we have the necessary resources to generate that energy? And if not, what is the most cost-effective way to basically make sure that supply and demand are aligned? In 2019, there was a law passed in the legislature that instructed the PSC to make a bunch of rules, basically tightening up the IRP process. In previous years, the IRP process has been fought over a lot because the utility has a lot of latitude in the way that it can develop the plan. It doesn't need to necessarily show how it reaches its conclusions or share its modeling or its inputs. So we've had reason to believe that renewable energy, especially renewable energy and storage, has been undervalued in past IRPs, and we know for a fact that energy efficiency and conservation measures have just not even been considered as part of the Integrated Resource Plan. And the reason they call these plans integrated is because it's supposed to encapsulate more than just power plants. It's supposed to also think of how people use energy when they're using it. Can they shift their load? Can they use less energy through energy efficiency interventions? And the 2019 law was meant to sort of bring those considerations into the actual planning process. Unfortunately, the utilities just want weak rules. They don't want to do more than they have to in order to make this document a reliable document. I think it seems like they sort of just want to check the box and then put forward, say the energy is going to grow and they're going to need X number of resources, and then they can write their own request for proposals and essentially write that proposal such that, you know, the only plant that suffices is a gas plant, and then they get to build that gas plant. And then they'll point to their resource procurement plan and say, hey, well, look, we needed this gas plant. But the truth is they didn't actually consider the full range of energy resources. So in July, the commission put forward a rule that attempted to improve, or well, so the law passed in 2019, and the PSC has actually gone through multiple iterations of soliciting comments and publishing drafts and then getting pushback from either the utilities or public interest advocates like MEIC, pushing back and forth over how stringent these rules would be. The rules published in July did not seem like they actually built on the comments that we had submitted in the past. They seemed to do actually very little to improve the IRP process. It would have not required the utility to actually do almost anything different. So we pushed back, we showed up, we commented, and lo and behold, the staff went back and they made a bunch of revisions, and they brought forward a new draft rules to the commission, and then the utilities showed up and they said, these rules are unacceptable. This is so important. You wouldn't want to get this wrong. We just simply wouldn't be able to operate under these rules. And the commission, unfortunately, while some of them listened to them, they voted 3-2 to postpone the rulemaking to January 2023. So it'll be 4 years probably before the IRP law that the PSC is mandated to turn into rules actually makes rules, which unfortunately gives then Northwestern, who seems like they don't like these rules, an opportunity to go to the legislature and try to roll them back. So that's what's going on with IRP, which is pertinent also because right now Northwestern Energy is working on its 2022 IRP. The first draft of which is going to be anticipated to be released on October 6th. And this is just a screenshot from a presentation that Northwestern gave in July, I think, in which this is sort of the first model run that they were just showing the Electrical Technical Advisory Committee, which I'm sitting on. And the big black line kind of tells the whole story here. 2025, they want to build a 250 megawatt gas plant in this sort of assumed scenario. And that's just why these are important. It sort of like is the beginning of setting the narrative that they need certain resources, but our concern is just that narrative is not complete. So the takeaways are we want to help the commission pass IRP rules that lead to more informed resource planning that includes the actual full range of cost-effective resources. We want to scrutinize NorthWestern Energy's 2022 IRP, which we will be doing when it comes out. And we're hosting a series of events in which we sort of dig more deeply into that. And we'll talk more about that later. And there are opportunities to comment on both the IRP that's coming out this year and the IRP rules. And we'll let you know when time for that is. Moving on to another venue of PSC activity. They announced last month that they're going to, or maybe it's even earlier this month, they're going to launch an investigation into regional resource adequacy. So the problem, somewhat ironically, that they identify is that NorthWestern Energy's resource planning approach is not reliable. Why don't they think it's reliable? Well, they think that traditional planning methods don't work, and that this is informed partially by two things, we think. One is a Western Electricity Coordinating Council paper that came out last year that identified the entire Western region may be resource challenged in the next coming decades as load grows, as increasing renewables come onto the grid, and especially as like climate impacts make traditional planning a little more unpredictable, especially with the lower water levels in hydroelectric dams, which is not so much a problem up in the north where we are, but like Hoover, Glen Canyon dams are experiencing some things. So the idea is also, but the idea is that they don't seem to trust Northwestern's resource planning. And the irony is they actually have the power to write rules in order to improve Northwestern's resource planning, which maybe this is part of, but the question is sort of what direction are they going to go with these rules? And then obviously fear of blackouts, the commissioners love to talk about, and Northwestern also, like they like to point to California. They like to point to times that we're resource scarce or need to import electricity from the market. But yeah, so their solution is they are going to have a conference in November in which they sort of bring together a bunch of people that have thoughts on resource adequacy, and that's really all we know at this point. It's in their notice for the announcement for this sort of investigation. It seemed like they were really interested in adding more baseload and increasing the planning reserve margins for the utility, which all you need to know is that just means building more power plants, essentially, to have them on call in case we're resource stressed. We're concerned that these are maybe code for keeping Colstrip open, or just really paving the way for new gas plants with maybe less oversight or less need to sort of justify building them. Again, the PSC sort of has final say as to whether these things can go in the rates. So how they decide about this is very important to sort of Montana's energy future. And we're also just concerned about the PSC's capacity. Like, a regional resource adequacy investigation is an extremely big undertaking, and they are already dealing with all these rules and Northwestern's resource procurement plan or IRP, and they're already looking at Northwestern's rate case. So we just hope that they have the capacity to actually take this question seriously, as well as taking an opportunity to learn from all the people that show up at this conference. From our perspective, there are actually a lot of modern solutions for resource adequacy that don't involve building new power plants, especially because overbuilding power plants can be an expensive and wasteful solution to a problem that is supply and demand. So if you're just looking at the supply picture, you're actually missing half the equation, which is how do we use our energy? And so the commission actually has many options through the rate case and through rulemakings and other things to require more energy efficiency and conservation. Northwestern is allowed, and the commission is actually required, I think, to accept as just and reasonable all the conservation energy efficiency investments that Northwestern wants to make, or investor-owned utilities want to make. And it's just a question of them actually figuring out a program and rolling it out in order to capture conservation that would make it easier to sort of meet these resource stressed times, just simply by turning down the dial on how much energy we're using, as opposed to having to turn on an entire power plant in order to make our air conditioners run. So another thing that we can do we will be doing is encouraging utilities to build more renewable energy. The Inflation Reduction Act, I'm sure people have heard of it. I'm happy to talk more about it if you haven't, is a huge deal in terms of climate technology. They're up to 50% tax credit investment tax credits for certain projects. The cost of especially hybrid renewable systems, which are like solar plus storage or wind plus storage, has come down dramatically. And it's just going to be a much, much more accessible and easier to build and cheaper resource than it has been in the past. And so, part of what we're also doing in the IRP is encouraging Northwestern to reassess its model and make sure that those savings are actually accounted for, such that the low cost of these alternative fuels can be recognized. Additionally, there are price signals and rate design. This is just sort of there's basic economics. Like, if you make something more expensive, people will buy less of it. So there's a lot of ways to do this through rate design. For example, after you use a certain amount of energy in a month or in a day, you can make that price of energy higher, such that people are disincentivized to use more energy than they necessarily need. Additionally, there's time of use rates, which are similar to that, except it's on a daily cycle. So you look at how much energy is used during the day, and you say, okay, where are we most stressed during the day? And then you make electricity more expensive at that time of the day. And that's something that the commission could just ask our utility to do. Or ask them even to study it or do a pilot. They have a lot of options. And this would not necessarily solve the resource adequacy problem, I think that's worth noting. Like as demand grows, you will just have it'll be harder and harder just to simply solve these problems with rate design, but you can push those timelines further out. So you can say, okay, well, maybe we will have to build a power plant, but we don't have to actually build it in 2023. We can build it in 2025 because we've slowed load growth through these innovative rate designs and price signals. Another thing that the commission should encourage our utilities to look at is joining a regional transmission market. This is just a way that utilities around the region can share energy and share resources and sort of spread out. Basically, if we're overproducing wind when someone else is energy short, or someone else is overproducing solar when we're energy short, we can just share that energy more easily if we have a well-designed market. I think this is just a really interesting example of sort of the price signal. This is from the California near blackout event from September 6th. I'm sure maybe people have heard of it, maybe they haven't. But if you look, this black line is the energy demand that people were having. And so as we were nearing 6 o'clock, so the solar, and that's, so basically the solar is represented in these orange and blue lines. And as those were about to go offline, as the sun went down, California just sent out a simple text and load, that black line dropped precipitously in just 15 minutes and prevented a huge blackout in the state. And so obviously, like I'm saying, it's not a long-term solution. We can't not build anything over many, many years because of just sending text, and it's not really viable, but it is just to point out that there are many different ways to keep the lights on than building another gas plant. And again, gas plants are expensive, as can be seen in NorthWestern's request for a rate increase this year. And I'm going to turn it over to Ann to talk more about that.
Thanks, Ian. And what we'll do is just, if you have clarification questions, go ahead and ask them. But otherwise, let's just try and take all the questions at the end, if that's okay with folks. And I am going to move through the rate case really quickly because it's complicated and it is in the early stages. So just so you know, MEIC is a party in NorthWestern's rate case. A rate case is a request to the Montana Public Service Commission to adjust rates. A utility does this periodically, and you know they are deserving of rate changes because the market's changed. However, this rate increase is truly remarkable. NorthWestern already has some of, if not the highest rates in the Pacific Northwest, and yet they're coming to the commission right now and they're asking for a permanent 25% rate increase for electricity, 11% for gas. And these are large numbers. A lot of Montanans simply can't afford another $276 for power bills. That is just an enormous amount. And really, we should be looking at how can we decrease people's utility bills. People are struggling. They can't afford housing, and electricity is certainly a need, but they simply can't afford that kind of big jump in their utility bills. We just saw the interim rate increase that was approved this week by the Public Service Commission that was also dramatic. The good thing about an interim rate increase is, should the commission over the period of the rate case determine that that was inappropriate, customers will get reimbursed those costs. So that's a good thing. But it is not a good thing to have a utility that just keeps coming back to the commission and asking for more and more money without having a plan for how to decrease customers' bills. And the easiest way to decrease bills is through efficiency and conservation measures. There are things the utility could do and should do, and we're just not seeing this from this utility. And that said, I just want to make sure I welcome NorthWestern Energy. I know that they're on this call as well. And I saw some union folks. Definitely a big fat welcome to you. We love having these open conversations, and we appreciate the fact that you're here to learn. But we would love to also talk to you afterwards. But let's get back to the rate case. The biggest problem we see with this rate case is Northwestern seems to be doing an end run around a legal decision by a court last May that found that pre-approval was unconstitutional. So the pre-approval statute was a law that was passed with re-regulation that allowed Northwestern to come to the Utility Commission and ask for a power plant to be rate-based in advance of that plant actually being built. And what that does is shift the risk for the plant cost to customers immediately. Instead of having a utility that has to build something, make sure that it's keeping costs low because it's not guaranteed to get a return on that investment. You know, they're going to be way more prudent with their own money than they are going to be with customer money. And pre-approval was this advantage given to Northwestern after, you know, the fiasco of deregulation to try to allow them to own generation assets. And it made sense at the time, it really did. It doesn't make sense in its current form today. And a court said it just wasn't properly done. So Northwestern wasn't allowed to get pre-approval. In fact, it sought pre-approval for the Laurel gas plant, now called the Yellowstone Generating Station or Yellowstone County Generating Station. It sought pre-approval from the Public Service Commission, and it withdrew that request for pre-approval. And now you have Northwestern having withdrawn pre-approval, the pre-approval request. You have a court saying pre-approval is unconstitutional. And now you have the utility coming through in a rate case asking for something called a reliability rider, something that we've never heard of. A reliability rider is, in our minds, it's Northwestern's way of trying to threaten blackouts if they can't build another gas plant. And it doesn't compute that a utility that is not allowed to get pre-approval is in fact seeking exactly that. It is looking for $286 million from customers, a total of $52 million, $54 million a year for the next 20 years, which is over $1 billion total, not counting fuel costs. It is asking the commission to put that in our rates right now and saying, commission, don't worry, we're going to come back later after the plant is built to get approval. But yet we already will be paying for it. That doesn't, I mean, that's illogical. It makes no sense. And I think Northwestern needs to be honest with the Public Service Commission and with its customers about this gas plant. And we have a right before it gets built to, after it gets built, to take a look and see what Northwestern spent. If a reliability rider is their best guess of how much this is going to cost, let's not saddle customers with the bill before we even are sure what the bill will be. It's not fair. $1 billion for a gas plant over 20 years. There are way better ways to generate 175 megawatts of electricity than a gas plant that is going to have a lot of methane emissions from cradle to grave. Next slide. But what I really want to talk about tonight, one last thing on the rate case, the commission isn't going to decide this case until probably April. I think that's the last schedule I saw. So we have a lot of months to try to investigate what's going on with Northwestern and its request, asking questions. Lots of parties are involved, trying to get to the bottom of what this is that Northwestern is really proposing and why it needs such a large increase. So we'll keep you posted. MEIC, because we are a party, however, we cannot ask you to contact the Public Service Commission. That is something that you will not see from us at all. That's like asking, if we asked you to contact them, it'd be like lobbying a judge. And so while we traditionally ask you to contact decision makers, this is an instance where we will not, because it is a legal proceeding. So just so you know, we will give you information, but we will not ask you to contact the commission. Okay, next slide. That's always an important caveat. So Colstrip ownership, and let me just talk a little bit about Colstrip and where things are at. And I just want to have a big fat qualifier. It is a mess. And nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows how this is going to end. I certainly don't know how this is going to end. I don't know there's a lot more I don't know than I do know, but I will share with you the things that I have learned since Talon declared bankruptcy. And I just want to start this conversation with the basics and make sure everybody is on the same page. Colstrip ownership is very complicated. It is a plant that is owned by 6 different owners. And, you know, unit 1 and 2 were closed a couple years ago because they were no longer economic. Colstrip units 3 and 4 are still operating. They're very large units. Each one is about 750 megawatts. That's a really big plant. Most of the power goes out of state. As you can see in this, I grabbed this from Talon's bankruptcy filing or something, one of their bankruptcy filings. But it's a good graphic and it shows you Puget Sound Energy is in Washington State, Pacific Core, they're a beast, they're everywhere. Pacific Core has operations in Washington, but all over the West. Avista has operations in Washington and Idaho. Portland General Electric has operations in Oregon. And then of course there's NorthWestern Energy. They only have a 30% share of 1 unit, that's unit 4. Talon Energy has that same share of unit 3. Talon and Northwestern have an agreement between the 2 of them to share energy. So in essence, when the plant is only running at half steam, they get half of the energy that they would otherwise get. It's really an insurance policy for both of them. So if 1 unit goes down, they still are able to get some power out of the plant. But the ownership structure is really complex, mainly because the owners don't seem to be getting along too well. And that really, really matters. Next slide. When you consider how this plant was established, the agreement that was made between the owners back in the early 80s on how they were going to make decisions about the plant. And this is the operative language from the ownership agreement for units 3 and 4. And I've highlighted it because it is really the core of what is being debated at the moment. You need to make decisions of the plant, not you, but the plant owners need 55% share of the ownership. In addition to the operator, their committee member, plus 2 other committee members to make decisions about a whole host of things. And I didn't put these, I mean, I didn't have enough room to show you all of them. I'm happy to share this with anyone who wants it. But really the substantive operations of the plant are governed in the investments and the budgets. They all come back to this language. They need 55% of the ownership, and including the operator, Talon, and 2 other committee members to make a decision about how they're going to be spending money. And next slide. And they haven't, as we learned last session, the owners just don't seem to get along. And we found in the bankruptcy filing this letter, and it's a letter that the Pacific Northwest owners sent to Talon Energy, the operator and part owner of Unit 3, in which they were objecting to Talon's budget a couple years ago. And what they asked Talon to do is develop an exit strategy for them, to create a framework and a budget that closed the Colstrip plant within 60 months. That they wanted 1 or both units to be closed within 60 months. They wanted a couple alternatives, one where both units closed by 2025 and the other where 1 unit closed by 2025 and the other by 2027. This is, I believe, the letter, and I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty sure this is the letter that precipitated the chaos that reigned in the 2021 legislative session amongst all the owners. The bills that Talon brought to rewrite the ownership contract that are all sitting in court. So the other owners, the Pacific Northwest owners, have made it very clear that they want to close the plant. But we know that Northwestern doesn't. We certainly suspect, we know why Northwestern doesn't want to close the plant. It's because they haven't been very creative in finding replacement power. They only own 220 megawatts of this plant. I mean, 220 megawatts simply isn't that much. While the plant is big, the amount of power that Northwestern gets from it is really not very big. But Northwestern managed to convince a Public Service Commission, over a decade ago, to rate base an enormous sum of money, about $400 and some million from customers over the next 40 years, in which they are able to charge customers for Colstrip. So as long as it's operating, Northwestern is going to make that money back, plus about a 10% rate of return. It's a pretty good deal. It's a great financial deal for Northwestern. I can see why they wouldn't want to lose this. I will say there are other avenues Northwestern has available to it to try to recoup some of the money. There's an opportunity called securitization, in which Northwestern could recoup the money it has invested but not been paid by customers yet. And we would like them to take that pathway. But we haven't seen any movement on the part of Northwestern to figure out a path forward that doesn't include Colstrip. It's incredibly frustrating because we know that Colstrip is really expensive power. We know they have a coal contract that escalates regularly. We know that coal contract bumped up in price a whole heck of a lot the last time they renegotiated their coal contract in 2019, I think it was, late 2019. So this is a power plant that's only getting more expensive to operate. It just is. And they don't seem to have any desire to consider other options for how they can acquire that 200 megawatts of power. But the Pacific Northwest owners want, clearly have indicated they want out, they want an exit strategy. Next slide. But let's talk about Colstrip and how it actually operates. So how reliable is it? We hear this all the time. Colstrip is this really important baseload facility. Gosh, what would we do without it? Well, baseload is so last century of a concept. Utilities are figuring out how to provide power 24/7 in a changing energy world. There's not even a coal plant in the whole state of Idaho. The coal plant in Hawaii just went offline. Utilities are figuring this out, and Northwestern is creative and clever and smart and full of clever, creative, and smart people. They can do what other utilities are doing, and they could figure this out. But what we have is a coal plant that everybody likes to say is so reliable and so great. And while this is not Northwestern's share of Colstrip, this is all of Colstrip. So this is a chart that I look at periodically that the Energy Information Administration has that shows Northwestern's balancing authority. So how much power is moving through Northwestern's transmission system, for lack of a better way to put it. And so you can see the brown line is coal. That's Colstrip. And it's not very reliable. It is really all over the place, especially in the spring. They were having all sorts of problems, but even recently, it was going on and going off. So to say that, Colstrip is this plant that you turn on and you leave it on and everything is simple and hunky-dory and there's no need to change, I think this chart speaks volumes contrary to that theory. Colstrip is a plant that is increasingly having difficulty operating. I just don't know how you cannot want to plan for a different future when you look at a chart like this. Next slide. So let's get to the real crux of what's going on right now. And it really does revolve around Talon Energy. Talon is the operator of the facility. It is a 30% owner of one of the units. It was the most aggressive of any of the owners last session in trying to stick it to the other owners. Really, really bad behavior as far as I'm concerned, just writing all sorts of laws that it had to know were unconstitutional. And then the court has said they think they're unconstitutional, but we haven't had final rulings yet because when Talon went into bankruptcy, all litigation stopped. So we're still waiting for a final decision on whether Talon's brilliant ideas last session will actually be able to become law in a meaningful way. But I doubt it. Talon has been really really difficult to deal with and very non-transparent. So Talon is the only owner of the Colstrip plant that is not publicly traded. They are a merchant operator. They are not regulated by a utility commission. They don't have to file the same things with the SEC as Northwestern and Vista and the other owners of Colstrip. And, filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission are a great source of information to figure out what's going on with the plant, what a utility's plans are, what are the problems, who's suing them, who they're suing. I mean, SEC reports are super helpful for the public to know what's going on. Talon just doesn't have that. So there's really no real way to dig in and see where Talon's at. But let's just say what we do know. We know that Talon was formed about 8 years ago because PPL had a bunch of merchant assets, meaning that assets that were not regulated and guaranteed a rate of return by a utility commission. They had to sell their power on the open market. PP&L said, these are not profitable. We need to get rid of these. They tried to sell them. Northwestern declined to buy them. And Talon, they couldn't find anyone to buy them, so they created Talon. And Talon was, in my mind, designed to fail. When Talon, not too long thereafter, sued PP&L because it said PP&L didn't give it the money it needed for reclamation. It didn't give it the money it needed for pensions. That litigation is ongoing. Talon is basically saying PPL set them up and didn't give them the funding they needed to do the job that they're required to do, which is reclaim and to pay the workers their pensions. And so Talon has been having a very difficult financial time in the last year or so. And so last August, not this last August, but August 2021, Talon announced it was moving towards cryptocurrency. It was going to start investing in cryptocurrency as a means of making money. And I'm sorry, but that doesn't seem like a very prudent strategy for a company that's that big. So Talon is this company that is, in my mind, somewhat desperate to try to find revenue sources. And they failed to do so, really. So what happened is they declared bankruptcy a few months ago. And I just want to show this chart because this was in Talon's bankruptcy filing as well. And I think it really underscores the trouble or the difficulty, the problems with our bankruptcy laws. So Talon was able to carve out those unprofitable sections of Talon Corporation and have those declare bankruptcy. But Cumulative Growth Holdings, which is largely its cryptocurrency operation, that didn't declare bankruptcy. So they kept what they think is more profitable aside. They didn't put that into the bankruptcy. And they put Talon, Montana, along with a lot of other resources of theirs, into the bankruptcy proceedings, creating chaos. So they have negotiated a deal with Puget Sound Energy. And whether that deal needs utility commission approval in Washington state is an open question. But they have negotiated this deal in which Puget has given up so much of its voting rights at the plant that it is astounding that a utility would allow this company that's in bankruptcy to control its vote in so many forums. I just am kind of blown away by what Puget is giving up. I think it shows that Puget is really desperate to get out. But it makes us really concerned because of what Talon is saying in these bankruptcy proceedings. Next slide. So on the lower right, you're going to see that these are some of the terms of the agreement that was reached between Puget and Talon over Talon taking over Puget's share of the plant. And that is that Puget must cooperate with any use Talon wants to make of the site and cannot oppose new large loads on the site or installation, ownership, operation, maintenance, and use of fiber infrastructure to Colstrip. Now, anybody who has been following the Hardin generating station, that's the picture here, understands that when, when they start talking in these terms, what we're talking about is a cryptocurrency operation, similar probably to what happened at Hardin. You can see in the upper right-hand corner of this top picture, that's the crypto operation at the Hardin generating station. The lower picture is the entrance to the Hardin generating station. You can see you have your power producer, you have your data hub, and then down here you have Marathon Digital Holdings, and that is the company that is operating the crypto operation at Hardin, hopefully moving on. But it seems pretty clear that that's where Talon is headed with Colstrip, is trying to get on site some crypto operations. And when we're talking about reliability and how we've got to save Colstrip in order to feed energy to Montanans and make sure the lights stay on, cryptocurrency is the exact opposite. It is an enormous energy sink. It takes an enormous volume of energy for proof of work crypto, not proof of stake, but proof of work crypto, which is what most crypto operations are. They need these miners, which are just computers, to run all the time and constantly be solving these equations in order to collect Bitcoins. And these are not normal computers like you and I have sitting in our desktops. They are a computer that is specifically designed for mining, Bitcoin or whatever the cryptocurrency is that they're looking for. They're really hot. The computers take a ton of energy. They create a lot of heat. That's why you see all these fans at the top. So here's what we're concerned about. And Ian, can we go back to this slide 11? What we're concerned about is that if Puget sells its share to Talon, that gives Talon a 55% voting interest in the plant. It gives Northwestern and Talon a 55% voting interest in Unit 4. That means that the other owners of Colstrip really won't have any say over all of the votes that require a 55% share of ownership. And when they write it in a way that says that Puget is going to be directed by Talon and cast their vote according to what Talon wants, that gives them the two owners casting their vote too. So it's a slick way for for Talon and for Northwestern to take over operations of Colstrip. Now, you might think, oh, if you really want Colstrip to continue operating, you might say, well, that's a good thing. But let's be clear about what Talon has been saying. Talon is saying it told bankruptcy court, it is going to continue to operate the plant as long as it's economic. They're negotiating a new coal contract right now. The price of this is going up. The price of other fuels is going down, not fuels, but resources are going down. The price of Colstrip is moving in the wrong direction compared to other resources. But Talon pulled this on Unit 1 and 2, where out of the blue, they said it's no longer economic to operate Units 1 and 2, and we're going to close them at the end of the year. Nobody saw that coming. I mean, we had negotiated an agreement in which they agreed to close by 2022, but this was way earlier than that. So Talon has the ability to kind of just throw up its hands and say, never mind, this isn't making us enough money. And where does that leave the community? Where does that leave the workers? If we can't plan for a transition that thinks about the community, the workers, the climate, then we have failed. We get a big fat F- for not thinking about what the future is going to look like, for not planning for energy resources to replace Colstrip. Should Talon disappear? Should Talon, right now they're in Chapter 11 bankruptcy. What happens if all these crypto operations don't really work out so well for Talon? How do you really think they're going to stick around? Do you really think they're going to be present? I would argue no. So Ian, let's go down to slide 17. So all this really does, in my mind, is create a lot of chaos, a lot of uncertainty, and probably higher utility bills for the remaining owners of Colstrip. But what comes next? And I don't want to, like I said, I don't have a crystal ball. I sure wish I did. But I can tell you that everything is lining up to look like Talon wants to build crypto operations at Colstrip. It has been what I think is very clear in its agreement with Puget that Puget has to go along with that and vote that way. It's a big question mark for cleanup. So, Talon negotiated a deal with the DEQ to decrease the bond by $120 million for cleanup at the site. Cleanup is a long way from over. There are so many decisions that still need to be made on cleanup. And DEQ's, mantra is, don't worry, we can always increase the bond over time if we need to. But that's not comforting if you don't, if one of the owners disappears, if they just don't exist anymore, if they just decide to go belly up. Cleanup is a big question mark, even with the bonding that the companies have in place. Bonding isn't static. It is something that changes over time. And if people say, oh, we have bonding to clean up, well, first off, we have less money than we did under Steve Bullock, and the bonding levels change over time. And Talon is simply not a good partner in this scenario. What we do know comes next is chaos. The owners right now, NorthWestern, rightfully so, asked for arbitration amongst the owners pursuant to the 1982 coal contract or ownership contract. They did that early in 2021. And Talon really frustrated those efforts. The owners now have finally convinced the bankruptcy court to allow them to proceed with arbitration. That arbitration is about, how does Colstrip close? What kind of vote is needed? Who gets to make decisions? We can only hope that arbitration goes, is quick, that we can get some resolution to the question of what the ownership contract, because I can guarantee that ownership contract written in 1982 would not stand up today as a model of legal prowess. It is really a mess, and it's complicated, and the owners should be in arbitration trying to figure out what the language in it means. So I'm happy to see that. I just worry about how that's going to proceed, but it's going to be chaos. The worst thing here is the climate. Colstrip is an enormous contributor to climate pollution in Montana. We may have gotten closure on units 1 and 2, but those were much smaller units. Unit 3 and 4, those are the big units. And we're talking 8 to 10 million tons of greenhouse gases a year being released from that facility. And that is not the direction we need to move in as a country if we are going to meet our climate goals, and if we are going to avoid climate catastrophe like Hurricane Ian just dumped on Florida. There's a lot of disasters, and they're very costly disasters that we're having to deal with because of climate change. And if we can't solve a problem of one single plant like Colstrip and get it on a path towards closure and replacement, then we simply can't solve our climate problem. I mean, it's that simple. And we're going to have crazy high utility bills. We can't keep pouring money into Colstrip and into coal and escalating bills for coal at this facility and not expect to have higher utility bills. We need to have a plan to decrease utility bills, to have affordable utility bills, to help people save money on their utility bills, to be more efficient in their daily lives and in their homes. Colstrip is exactly the opposite of all of that. So what comes next? I don't know, but it makes me really nervous. It makes me very worried about the direction we're heading, the direction our utility is heading, what our utility might get stuck with because of what I call a bad actor, and that's Talon. So that's the end of what I had to say. It is, yes.
Great. We have some questions. We'll pull some in the chat, and then if you have a question and you want to use the reactions to raise your hand, we'll unmute you, but we'll work through the ones that have come through in the chat first. So we had a question from Mark early on, asking about Bob Rowe's retirement from NorthWestern Energy and how we anticipate this will result in any significant changes in NorthWestern's plans and policies.
Again, that's a crystal ball that we don't have. I think it doesn't bode well that they hired internally somebody who has been with the company for a very long time, who is really ingrained in the company's philosophy and the company's talking points. And I think this would have been a very, very important time to interject new blood that's more creative in the modern energy world. I think it's unfortunate that NorthWestern decided not to. And so I'm not hopeful that we're going to see any real change out of NorthWestern. I think that they're going to stick with their current model of let's do more fossil fuels to address greenhouse gas emissions, which
another question from Mark, looking for financial perspective. Roughly how much money is each of the owners of the Colstrip units making or losing each year as a result of involvement? And how big of a deal is this on overall profitability and sustainability as a going concern?
That's a great question. And I don't have the answer to that. That's a question that I'm not even sure anybody has the answer to that. I think you'd have to dig into the filings of each utility before their utility commissions. You'd have to be an intervener in those cases, and you'd have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So even if there's somebody out there who knows all those answers, I don't think they could actually say the answer. We just know some of that answer, which is the coal is, we've seen portions. I have not seen the whole coal contract, and nobody who can say anything about it has. But what I have seen is that the coal price is escalating over time and had a really significant jump when they just negotiated the last coal contract fairly recently.
Great, thanks. One more in the chat right now from Amanda. Do we know when arbitration is set to begin and who will be overseeing the process?
We do, and I'm happy to share the information I have. There's a filing. I mean, we know a little bit. There's a filing that we have from the owners involved in that arbitration in court in Montana. I think it mentioned the names of the people who were involved in the arbitration, who are going to be overseeing that arbitration. But ultimately, it's arbitration that is going to be overseen by a court in Montana. So hopefully it has begun. They made it sound like they were in the beginning stages of that in the middle of September.
Question from Mary Catherine.
Hi, Ann. I have several questions. The first is, if Montanans are going to be saddled with high energy bills, that's going to cause a lot of economic harm to Montana's economy when businesses fail or go bankrupt, because their profit margins will, be affected. My question is there any liability? I mean, is there any legal recourse that those businesses will have either against Northwest Energy or the PSC for not protecting them? Because the PSC has a mandate to protect Montanans, not Northwest Energy.
Actually, let me start with your first question.
Okay.
The PSC has an obligation to balance the needs of customers and the needs of the utility. It is really important that we have a financially healthy utility. It allows them to go out into the market and raise capital at lower interest rates. It is really important. A bankrupt utility is a very, very bad thing one that's in financial trouble is a very bad thing for customers. So we don't want to go there. And the PSC's obligation is to make sure that we have a balance between customers and a utility. But there's a lot of people engaged in the rate case, and the rate case is where NorthWestern requests rate changes, is requesting this big 25% increase in electric rates, 11% in gas rates. And there's a lot of people that have intervened in that case to try to protect their interest, including large customer groups and others who are, they pay bills and they don't want their rates to go up either. And they have really good attorneys. And so they'll be scrutinizing NorthWestern's application and responses to its questions as much as anybody. So they are in the process. What is their recourse? If the PSC makes an arbitrary decision, they could always go to court. But, the PSC is, for all of the chaos that we've seen at the PSC in the last, say, 5 years, they often make a decision that is somewhat balanced. They have a very good staff, although there's been a lot of staff turnover, which is of concern. And they don't have the capacity as a staff any longer to really keep up with all the workload that they have. And I know they're going to the legislature asking for 6 new employees to try to help. So I'm gonna put a little bit of faith in the PSC. They have denied NorthWestern's rate increase requests before, or PCAM and their request to have customers pay for Colstrip when it breaks. So what's our recourse? Our recourse, unfortunately, is largely legal and to get involved in the rate case. One more, and then we'll go to somebody else just in case we want, and then we can come back to you, Mary.
Well, my other question also has to do with the climate catastrophe part and the way businesses are affected. And if NorthWestern Energy insists on developing these power plants that puke out all this carbon, we saw what happened in Yellowstone and Florida and rivers drying up in Europe this summer. How bad does it have to get before these people finally realize this isn't a great idea? And also, what's the legal liability there against NorthWestern Energy?
It's a great question, and we don't have to go to Europe to look at the drought. I mean, go to the desert Southwest and look at
the Colorado River.
Yeah, it's a mess, and we need to get our shit in order. We really just cannot continue business as usual like we are now. And NorthWestern has a complete bullshit plan for net zero, and I just can't use any other term to describe their plan to say that they want to decarbonize by 2050, when their plan allows them to increase emissions by till 2035, and then maybe magically figure out how to decrease emissions. That is not a responsible utility. That is a utility that's kicking the can down the road and hoping that somebody else is in charge when those tough decisions need to be made. What can we do about it? I think there's a couple things. The Securities and Exchange Commission needs to engage and force these utilities to, and they have done some of this, to really disclose their climate, their emissions, their climate impacts, and what they're doing. We just need a lot better oversight of these types of high polluting operations when it comes to the climate. And we saw some of this in the cryptocurrency world last week or 2 weeks ago when the Biden administration came out with some recommendations for what to do about cryptocurrency and the proof of work's really high energy demands. So I think we're seeing some movement to try to create a better framework for companies to deal with this. But we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'm going to say that we've tried for so many years to try to put a cost on greenhouse gases and to try to use market tools to disincentivize bad behavior. And MEIC has been on various sides of that whole debate, but ultimately what the IRA did is just move in a totally different direction that's using all carrots all enticements to modernize our energy sector. And it's going to have profound impacts on the price signals for utilities. And we need a public service commission who's going to pay attention and realize that those price signals are something that maybe a utility isn't quite as interested in, but they are important for determining what our energy future is going to look like if we care about customers and the price of power. So I'm excited about what the IRA might bring, but it's going to be a hurdle to get over utilities' traditional model of let's just build more and charge customers for big fossil fuel projects. So we have our work cut out for us, and we don't have much time.
True.
All right, I'm going to cut in really quick to pitch this event on the slide. The Montana Renewable Energy Association and MEIC are holding an event in a couple of weeks at a similar time, just talking about the Public Service Commission and why it matters. Really, if you have had questions about how it works and what it does and why we should care about what they do, join us for that. Bring your questions. Nothing too big or too small for that one. Really looking forward to that event. And then Ian, we go to the next slide, please. We're also planning a series of events about the Integrated Resource Plan in a community near you. These dates are not yet finalized, but just to give you an idea of when we'll be in your neighborhood. And then just to kick it to the comments, we have a question from Will about the PSC rule to kick out interveners. And if you can talk about that a little bit.
I'm going to defer to Anne on that one. You actually have more experience being an intervener.
Katie, I am so sorry. I was reading some stuff in the chat. Would you rephrase that question or say it again?
Yeah, I'll read it more word for word. Could you please explain the new PSC rule to kick out interveners arbitrarily?
So the Public Service Commission has a rule on intervention that they did adopt a couple, I don't know, 2 months ago now or so, early August, that it's going to make it more difficult for people to engage at the Public Service Commission. As you've heard today, what matters is being before a Public Utility Commission when it's making these decisions that involve 20, 30, 40-year assets and the direction of our energy markets. And when the PSC adopted rules that gives them the ability to prevent interveners from either joining or from asking questions, or allows the PSC to kick them out if they don't like their questions, it is the exact opposite direction of where most utility commissions live. Most utility commissions have rules that are very liberal when it comes to allowing intervention. When you have a utility commission that doesn't have the resources it needs to bring in all the experts to comb through a utility's filing and ask questions and really get to the root of what the utility is asking for and whether it's valid or not, that's the benefit of interveners. We bring experts to the table. They can ignore our experts, but we bring them to the table. They usually don't ignore our experts. We have good experts. We have great attorneys in Earth Justice. So really, intervention traditionally has always been very liberally construed, where everybody who wants to get in can get in and ask questions and help the utility commission do its job to find out, truth from fiction in the utilities filings. And this rule really moves it in the opposite direction. And with any luck, the commission will be very prudent about its application. It just depends on, who your commissioners are and what their agendas are as to whether or not they want to bother with some interveners. And we've heard rumors that there are some commissioners that don't want MEIC there. And that's of concern because we bring a lot of value to the table, and we often get positive results from the commission. in the end, because our experts they're experts. You know, they are experts. They know how to rigorously review a utility commission filing. So, you know, time will tell as to whether that intervention rule is going to play an important role in keeping us out. But so far, you know, the rule, I don't believe is, if it has got into effect, it was only very recently. The rule hasn't come into play yet, so to be continued, but it's concerning.
I think that sounds like a good place to stop. What do you think, Anne and Ian?
Yes, and you know, if anybody has more questions, I'm happy to stay here for a few more minutes, but I just want to make sure to thank all of you very much for being here today. If there's anything I said or Ian said that you want clarification on, or you want the documentation to back it up so you can use it, just reach out to us at these email addresses and we are happy to help. And all I can say is my inbox, I get a lot of emails and I am not great at responding to each and every one. So if you don't hear from me in a couple days, then please reping me and ask me again. It's not that I'm ignoring you, it's that I probably didn't see your email. So I'm apologizing in advance.
Great. And I also dropped a link in the chat. If you enjoyed the webinar and want to support our work, if you don't already, please, you can do so online. We can't do our work without our supporters, and we're really grateful for you. And I'm going to stop recording. And if anyone else has additional questions, we're happy to stay around for a few more minutes. So thanks so much.